On one side, Russian industrial cities are plunged into darkness by attacks on Ukraine. On the other side, a vast geography is isolated from the outside world, shut down by the Kremlin itself. Look closely at this darkness on the map. Lights are going out one by one across the Russian Federation. Systems are being shut down from Crimea to St. Petersburg, along a 1,000-kilometer stretch from Ulanovsk to Saratov. People are no longer just afraid, they are completely exhausted and worn out. Look. In an image that went viral on social media and bypassed the regime's censorship walls. A Russian citizen describes living in a ghost town in Saratov, where the internet has been cut off for months. They shut off the entire internet. I say, what the? People are just sitting there in shock. They can't pick up their orders from the pickup point, can't work online. Can't make calls, can't do anything at all. It's not just Saratov. Angry young people in St. Petersburg are rebelling on social media. Our internet hasn't been working at all for 2 days, I mean not at all. Not in the city center, nowhere. Banking systems have collapsed. Electronic money has turned into virtual nothingness in a second. And the people's anger has spilled onto the streets. Vladimir Putin is trying everything to plunge Russians into darkness. The picture we see is not a simple outage, but points to a planned state suicide. This massive blackout operation was not a reflex decision made by the Kremlin one morning. It was an experiment that had been woven together for months, but ultimately spiraled out of control. Even the largest metropolises cannot escape this. Over 1.3 million sites have been blocked. Internet access has been shut down, social media has been blocked. Banking systems have reached a major impasse. People are now rushing to banks to withdraw their money. There is no trust, there is no freedom, a fuel crisis, a security crisis, and a total blackout. What is happening is not a temporary glitch but a Mad Max-style collapse. The images coming from Saratov are the clearest evidence of this collapse. What the man describes is not a simple complaint, but a declaration of the regime's bankruptcy. He describes how the regime panicked and shut down infrastructure, how production stopped, and how the food chain broke down. Putin's experiment, which has cut millions of Russians off from the modern age and condemned them to the cold of the 19th century, is a picture of absolute chaos that has replaced Putin's promise of victory. And people are asking, who is shutting down the internet? Where is this administration? When you start the generator, there is no internet to get news from the world or make your voice heard. The signal is gone, the connection is collapsed. This is not modern life. It is a cruel simulation, an open-air prison. Look, we live in the world's most awesome country. We are not North Korea, we are Russia. The cry of "We are not North Korea" rising from the streets is actually the voice of an existential crisis echoing across the entire country. This situation is turning into a logistical apartheid imposed by the Russian state on its own people. Aside from the human and social damage caused by this blackout, it is also destroying Russia from within with a massive economic loss of 12 billion per year. To understand the technical architecture of this destruction, we need to look beyond the visible actors on stage and examine the gears of the mechanism. The structure before us is no longer simply Roskomnadzor, a media regulatory agency, but a fully empowered digital execution bureau. The 59% increase in blockages compared to 2024 points to a systematic digital cleansing operation rather than bureaucratic zealotry. Russia's state internet regulator completely blocked access to 1.289 million online pages last year as authorities expanded their oversight and tightened restrictions on sensitive content. The critical detail here lies in the nature of the restrictions. The regime is not targeting random websites, but rather the tunnels that directly facilitate the flow of information. Blocking of tools used to circumvent internet restrictions, namely VPN and proxy services, increased by an astonishing 235%, exceeding 93.0. This data clearly reveals a shift in the Kremlin strategy. The goal is not to block harmful content, but to completely seal off Russian citizens' escape routes from reality. Blocking a VPN service is not just about deleting an app. It's about cutting off the only lifeline millions of people have to the outside world. On the technical side, Roskomnadzor now operates with AI-powered autonomous systems rather than human labor. As Natalia Tylovich, CEO of Social Laboratory, pointed out, this increase is driven by the AI's use of more advanced text analysis, image recognition, and predictive analysis tools. In other words, the regime has developed a thought police algorithm that predicts what its citizens are reading, watching, and thinking, and takes preemptive action accordingly. The system eliminates the digital presence in question without human intervention the moment it detects a potential threat. Platforms such as VKontakte, Odnoklassniki, Telegram, and TikTok are under constant surveillance by this algorithmic scanning. This situation is transforming Russia's internet infrastructure from being part of the global network into an isolated internet system, a kind of ruined autarky. This project, marketed under the name State Digital Transformation, is actually a digital massacre in which 30 web servers are blocked every day. The internet architecture is, by its very nature, based on connectivity. When you cut these connections at millions of points, what you are left with is not a functioning network, but a fragmented and useless pile of data. The process is not limited to blocking access to external information. It also involves sterilizing internal information. The overnight deletion of court records to conceal the Russian army's losses in 2025 is the most concrete example of this digital blackout. Data cleansing acts as a digital shroud covering physical losses. By erasing the truth not only from the present but also from history, the regime is destroying social memory. This technical infrastructure aims to sever Russia from the modern world while creating a perfect circle of obedience and silence within. However, the price of this silence is creating an economic collapse far heavier than the Kremlin could have predicted. The shockwaves created by this digital siege are not limited to abstract concepts like freedom of expression. They are a concrete and devastating hammer blow to the very heart of Russia's real economy. The internet is the nervous system of the 21st century economy, and Putin is trying to stay afloat by cutting his own nerves. The picture that emerges is one of economic disaster. Russia has set a global record for internet outages, surpassing even the combined total of repressive regimes such as Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, and Venezuela. The 37,166 hours of internet outages and access restrictions recorded in 2025 are not sustainable for a modern economy. This is pulling the plug on the system. The cost of these outages creates a massive black hole that exceeds the Kremlin's propaganda budget. Experts confirm that the economic damage caused by blocking, throttling, and bandwidth restrictions ranges from 11.9 billion to 12 billion. This figure exceeds the total losses from internet disruptions in all other countries worldwide. Russia has single-handedly assassinated the global digital economy on its own soil. This self-inflicted economic damage is 10 times that of its closest rival, Venezuela, which has been struggling with crisis for years. This is not a technical glitch or temporary outage. It is a strangulation strategy directly affecting the lives of 146 million people. When the internet goes down, it's not just social media that stops. Banking systems slow down, logistics operations are halted, e-commerce platforms crash, and small businesses' channels to reach customers are wiped out. Such a severe disruption of the digital infrastructure is reverting Russia's economy, already weakened by sanctions, back to an inefficient and cumbersome Soviet model. An economy dependent on oil and gas revenues, unable to innovate or produce technology, and unable to exchange data with the outside world cannot compete in the modern world. It simply slowly decays. It is precisely at this point that we need to go into the field, into the lives of ordinary people, to see how economic collapse is tearing apart the social fabric. The human crisis beyond the numbers is much deeper and more devastating. Even more striking is the family trauma this situation creates. The breakdown in communication turns every home into an isolated island. A Russian man's desperate confession on social media sums up the situation. "I won't be able to read my mother's messages anymore." Even Vladimir Vladimirovich said that banning the people from so many things was unnecessary. But what can you do? Russians are very obedient. But the real panic begins when this silence turns into rebellion. And here we are entering a phase of civil uprising rarely seen in Russian history. The people are no longer just complaining, they are suing the state. The class action lawsuits filed against the WhatsApp and Telegram bans are proof that Russian society has overcome its wall of fear. While this may appear to be a legal battle, it is actually a test of civil disobedience against the regime. Unrest is growing in Russia. Your phone has turned into a brick and you have to pay cash in stores. This situation has turned daily life into a practical impossibility. In an authoritarian regime, citizens taking the state to court is not a simple legal case, but a war waged against the legitimacy of the system. People are now trying to corner Roskomnadzor, the state's censorship fist, in courtrooms. This is a legal preview of the impending major internal chaos. And most importantly, that cry we hear in this video, "We are not North Korea," is an expression of the greatest fear in the Russian collective unconscious. Russians may be accustomed to poverty or war, but they are not prepared for the idea of becoming a completely isolated, pitch-black, internetless, and fuelless pariah state. This voice rising in the streets of St. Petersburg is the scenario the Kremlin fears most. This social reaction shows that the undercurrent is beginning to surface. Contrary to the regime's expectation of silent acceptance, Putin thought he could control people by leaving them in the dark. But the darkness turned fear into anger. The strategic dimension of the event is evolving into something far more serious than a simple economic loss or temporary public anger. The collapse of the regime's own digital autarky doctrine. The Kremlin is now moving to destroy its last strongholds, encrypted messaging apps. State Duma Deputy Andrei Spinov's statements clearly announce where this war is headed. If violations are not corrected, the slowdown will not stop. WhatsApp could be completely blocked by the end of 2026. The ultimate goal here is very clear: to completely wipe out online anonymity in Russia and make every digital footprint subject to state surveillance. The statement, "We should be the first country in the world to completely abandon online anonymity," is a manifesto for a dystopian future. What is happening on the Telegram front is a complete cat-and-mouse game. Although Roskomnadzor denies it, sources in the telecommunications sector and user experiences confirm that the application is being deliberately stifled. The suggestion that Kremlin-aligned channels switch to domestic apps like Max, which are entirely under government control, signals that Telegram could also be shut down. This is an attempt to isolate the Russian people from independent news sources and confine them to an echo chamber consuming only state-approved propaganda. Censorship mechanisms start with well-intentioned laws, turn into a bureaucratic weapon, and eventually ban the most powerful political platforms. However, the strategic checkmate this strategy creates for Russia is this: the regime believes that by cutting off the flow of information, it will ensure security. But on the contrary, the information vacuum creates panic and chaos as people distrust official channels. Increasing restrictions drive them toward conspiracy theories and whisper campaigns. Cutting off the internet to hide the effects of Ukraine's drone attacks does not diminish the impact of the attack in the public eye. Rather, it amplifies the fear created by uncertainty. By silencing Western platforms, historians discussing Stalin's crimes, dissident journalists, and ordinary citizens, Russia is actually devastating its own intellectual and social capital. A country that erases its own memory cannot build its future. Putin's Russia is transforming into a massive isolated bunker, cut off from the global system, fearful of technology and reality. This isolation is not built to protect against external threats, but to hide the decay within. Yet as the walls rise, the pressure inside grows. As Russia draws its own borders in the digital world, it is actually building the walls of its own prison. And even the guards in this prison are not safe. Because the 2.3 billion ruble budget allocated to ban VPNs is wealth stolen from the people's pockets. And the people now see this. Putin's famous tacit social contract with the Russian people has become null and void. The record-breaking internet outage in 2025 and the evaporated 12 billion are proof that this contract has been burned in the digital trash heap. The regime set out to bury Ukraine in cold and darkness. But at the end of the day, it left its own people blind, deaf, and mute in the middle of a digital ice age. That 37,000-hour outage is not just a technical statistic. It is the very duration during which Russia was severed from the modern world, pushed outside of time. Walls went up, tunnels were closed, and Russia was trapped by its own leaders' paranoia. There is no safe place anymore, not even in the virtual world. Because the war in its most brutal form has come to your home, to the phone in your pocket. And when the screens go dark, all that remains is the silent echo of the approaching collapse. So what are your thoughts on this? Please share your thoughts in the comments.